They say money changes people. But in Isabel's case, it wasn't the money that changed her. It was the betrayal. Imagine staring at your husband of 5 years, the man you supported through bankruptcy and depression, only to have him hand you divorce papers on the day you both lost your jobs. He called her dead weight. He told her she was destined for mediocrity. He didn't know that 3 days later, a single phone call would hand Isabel the keys to a $1.3 billion real estate portfolio that owns the very ground he walked on. This is the story of how Derek Calloway threw away a queen to chase a pawn, and how Isabel Archer rose from the ashes to buy the bank that foreclosed on her heart. The heating in the apartment had been broken for 3 weeks. It was a cruel irony that in Chicago, amidst a polar vortex, the coldest thing in the room wasn't the frost creeping up the window pane. It was Derek's eyes. Isabel Archer sat at the wobbly kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot water, because they couldn't afford tea bags until Friday. She looked at her husband. Derek Calloway was a handsome man, with the kind of sharp jawline and charming smile that worked well in high-end car sales. But lately, the charm had eroded, revealing something jagged and ugly underneath. "Happy anniversary," Derek said. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. He slid a manila envelope across the scratched laminate table. It hit her coffee mug with a dull thud. Isabel blinked, confusion clouding her exhausted features. "Derek, I told you. We said no gifts. We need to save every cent for the rent. I managed to pick up an extra shift at the diner, but it's not a gift, Isabel. Open it." She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly. The paper felt heavy, cold. Inside, stapled with precision, was a document titled "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." The air left the room. Divorce. Derek, why? I know things are hard right now. I know losing the dealership job was a blow, and my layoff from the design firm was... It was bad timing. But we're a team, we promised. For richer or poorer. Derek laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. We're doing the poorer part really well, aren't we? Look at you, Isabel. Look at this place. You're wearing a sweater with a hole in the sleeve. You smell like diner grease. I smell like work, Isabel snapped, tears pricking her eyes. I'm working double shifts to pay your credit card debt, Derek. I sold my mother's engagement ring to keep your car from being repossessed. Derek stood up, smoothing down his suit, a custom Armani he refused to sell, claiming he needed it to maintain appearances. "And that's the problem," he sneered. "Your small time, your survival mode. I need to thrive. I met someone, Isabel, someone who fits where I'm going, not where I've been." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Someone? Who?" "Bianca. Bianca Sterling," Isabel gasped. "The daughter of your old boss? The one who got you fired for incompetence?" "The one whose father owns half the commercial district," Derek corrected, checking his watch. "She believes in my vision. She's going to seed my new venture. But she doesn't date married men. So, sign the papers. I'm moving out tonight. I've already packed." "You can't just leave me here," Isabel whispered, the reality crashing down on her. "Rent is due in 2 days. I don't have it. If you leave, I'm homeless." Derek walked to the door, grabbing his suitcase. He paused, hand on the knob, and looked back with a look of genuine pity that hurt worse than the anger. "Then I suggest you find a smaller box to live in. You were always good at being invisible, Isabel. Maybe it's time you disappeared." He slammed the door. Isabel sat in the silence of the freezing apartment, the papers staring up at her. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just sat there, feeling a piece of her soul wither and die. She was 32 years old, with $11 in her bank account, no career, and a husband who had just discarded her like a used wrapper. She was rock bottom, but she didn't know that the floor was about to give way to a gold mine. 3 months later. If rock bottom had a basement, Isabel was living in it. She had been evicted from the apartment 2 weeks after Derek left. She was now renting a room in a boarding house in the South Side that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and mildew. She worked 2 jobs, a morning shift at a bakery starting at 4 a.m. and a night shift cleaning office buildings downtown. It was a Tuesday night, raining the kind of icy sleet that cuts through cheap coats. Isabel was pushing a heavy cleaning cart across the marble lobby of the Sterling Holloway Tower. It was the crown jewel of Chicago real estate, 60 floors of steel and glass. As she buffed the floor, she saw them. Walking out of the private elevator, laughing, were Derek and Bianca. Derek looked spectacular. He was wearing a new suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. Bianca, a striking blonde with a sharp nose and eyes that looked like they calculated tax brackets for fun, was hanging off his arm. Isabel froze. She was wearing a shapeless grey jumpsuit, her hair tied back in a messy bun, holding a mop. She tried to turn the cart, to hide, but the wheels squeaked, a loud, piercing screech that echoed through the lobby. Derek turned. His eyes landed on her. For a second, he looked confused. Then, recognition dawned. And then, a smirk. He whispered something to Bianca. Bianca laughed, a high, tinkling sound that sounded like breaking glass. They walked over. "Isabel," Derek said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "I didn't know you'd pivoted to sanitation. It suits you." "Leave me alone, Derek," Isabel said, gripping the mop handle so hard her knuckles turned white. "Just saying hello," he said, stepping closer, invading her space. "Bianca and I just closed a deal for the penthouse. We're celebrating. I'm finally where I belong. On top. And you? Well, you missed a spot." He pointed to a smudge on the floor near her boot. Bianca giggled. "Come on, darling. Don't tease the help. We have reservations at Alinea." "Right," Derek said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and tossed it onto the wet floor. "For the effort. Buy yourself something nice. Like a new personality." They walked away, their footsteps clicking on the marble Isabel had just polished. Isabel stared at the bill soaking up the dirty water. Rage, hot and volcanic, bubbled up in her chest. She wanted to chase them. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. She picked up the wet $20. Not because she had no pride, but because she needed to eat. She finished her shift, walked back to the bus stop in the rain, and cried. She cried for the girl who used to dream of being an interior architect. She cried for the wasted years. When she got back to her boarding house, soaking wet, the landlady, Mrs. Higgins, was waiting for her. "You got a letter, honey?" Mrs. Higgins said, handing her a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Came via courier. Looks fancy. And strict. The guy made me sign for it." Isabel took it. The return address was embossed in gold leaf. Reginald Forbes, ESQ, Senior Partner, Forbes, Keaton and Associates, London, New York, Orsna, Geneva. Isabel frowned. "I don't know any lawyers in London." "Maybe you're being sued," Mrs. Higgins suggested helpfully. Isabel went to her tiny room, sat on the sagging mattress, and tore open the envelope. She expected a bill, a lawsuit from Derek. Another disaster. She pulled out a letter typed on heavy linen paper. "Dear Mrs. Calloway, née Archer, it is with solemn duty that I inform you of the passing of your great aunt, Cordelia Vanderbilt Harrington, of the Harrington dynasty. As you may know, Cordelia was estranged from your side of the family for 40 years, following your mother's decision to marry a common tradesman. However, Cordelia kept tabs on all her lineage. Upon her death last week in Zurich, her last will and testament was unsealed. The will contains a specific clause regarding the Horrington Trust. This trust includes the deed to the Harrington estate in Surrey, a majority stake in Harrington Global Holdings, and a diversified real estate portfolio valued at approximately $1.3 billion USD. Isabel stopped reading. She couldn't breathe. 1.3 billion? She thought her great-aunt was a myth, a story her mom told her about a grumpy old lady who lived in Europe. She forced her eyes back to the paper. There is, however, a condition of inheritance, Clause 7A. The assets are to be transferred to Isabel Archer solely and exclusively if, and only if, she is free of any marital bonds to one Derek Calloway. My private investigators have confirmed your divorce was finalized by the courts yesterday. Consequently, you are the sole heir. Enclosed is a first-class ticket to New York. Please come to our offices immediately. Do not speak to the press. Sincerely, Reginald Forbes. Isabel read the letter 3 times, then 5 times. The divorce, the very thing Derek used to destroy her, was the key that unlocked a fortune larger than anything Derek could ever dream of. If he had stayed married to her for just 1 more week, or if he hadn't rushed the paperwork to be with Bianca, the money would have been tied up in probate or shared. But he had rushed it. He had freed her. Isabel looked at the water-stained ceiling. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt dangerous. The office of Forbes, Keaton and Associates, was located on the 80th floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. The view was dizzying, looking down on Central Park like it was a backyard garden. Isabel sat across from Reginald Forbes. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of mahogany, sturdy, expensive, and unyielding. "Water?" he offered. "Whiskey," Isabel said. "Neat." Reginald raised an eyebrow, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. He poured 2 glasses. To Cordelia. She was a difficult woman, but she had an exquisite sense of timing. She hated Derek, Isabel asked, taking the glass. She was wearing a thrift store blazer she had steamed 3 times, trying to look presentable. She hated everyone, Reginald corrected. But she particularly detested men who, as she put it, preen like peacocks, but possess the brain of a pigeon. She had you under surveillance for 5 years, Isabel. She saw how you supported him. She saw how you suffered. She wrote the clause 2 years ago. She wanted to ensure that if you ever got this money, he wouldn't see a dime of it. Reginald slid a black binder across the desk. This is your portfolio. You now own 3 city blocks in Manhattan, 2 hotels in London, an island in the Mediterranean, and, interestingly enough, Reginald paused, flipping a page. You are now the majority shareholder of the syndicate that owns the debt of the Sterling Holloway Tower in Chicago. Isabel froze. The building where Derek just rented the penthouse? The building Bianca's father owns. Bianca's father, Mr. Sterling, is the developer, Reginald explained, his eyes twinkling with mischief. But developers run on debt. The bank that holds the mortgage on that tower was acquired by Harrington Global last month. Technically, you are their landlord. And looking at these financials, Mr. Sterling is behind on his payments. Isabel stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city. She thought about the mop bucket. She thought about the $20 bill on the wet floor. She thought about Derek's laugh. She turned back to Reginald. I don't want to just be rich, Reginald. What do you want to be, Ms. Archer? I want to be educated, she said, her voice hard as steel. I don't know how to run an empire. I need you to teach me. I need to know real estate law. I need to know corporate raiding. I need to know how to destroy someone without them ever seeing my face." Reginald leaned back, steepling his fingers. "That will take time, and a new wardrobe." "I have time," Isabel said. "And now I have the wardrobe." The next 6 months were a blur. Isabel didn't just spend money, she weaponized it. Under Reginald's tutelage, she underwent a metamorphosis. She hired image consultants, not to make her look like a trophy wife, but to make her look like a CEO. She cut her hair into a sharp, asymmetrical bob. She swapped the polyester for tailored silk and Italian wool. She learned to walk not with a scurry, but with a stride that commanded attention. She also studied. She spent 18 hours a day learning balance sheets, cap rates, and leverage buyouts. She wasn't just inheriting the Harrington empire, she was taking the wheel. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Derek was living the high life. His social media was full of photos of him and Bianca on yachts, at galas, driving Ferraris. He had started his own luxury real estate firm, Callaway Prime, funded entirely by Bianca's father. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was shifting. It started with small things. Callaway Prime's loan applications for new developments began getting rejected by major banks that were quietly advised by Harrington Global. Then, the rumors started. A mystery buyer was snapping up properties in Chicago, specifically the ones surrounding Derek's new office, squeezing the market. 6 months after the inheritance, Isabel was ready. "It's time," she told Reginald. "The Sterling Holloway Tower?" Reginald asked. "No," Isabel said. "That's dessert. I want the main course first. Derek is hosting the Gala of the Year next Saturday to launch his new flagship project. Everyone who is anyone in Chicago real estate will be there. He thinks he's going to announce a partnership with the cryptic Harrington Group because he sent an invite to the generic inbox and got a polite automated RSVP. He doesn't know you are the Harrington Group," Reginald chuckled. "He thinks Harrington is some old British guy." Isabel smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I want to accept his invitation, but I won't be coming as Isabel Archer, the ex-wife." "Who will you be?" "I'll be the chairman of the board." "Prepare the jet, Reginald. We're going home." The grand ballroom of the Palmer House. Hilton was draped in gold and velvet. It was the kind of opulence that screamed new money, trying desperately to look like old money. Derek Callaway stood at the center of the room, holding a crystal flute of champagne, basking in the adoration of Chicago's elite. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo. Beside him, Bianca Sterling shimmered in a silver gown that cost more than Isabel's old annual salary. "You've outdone yourself, Derek," a local councilman said, shaking his hand. "This Callaway Prime launch is the talk of the city. And rumor has it you've secured foreign investment?" Derek beamed, his chest swelling. "Indeed. We're expecting the chairman of Harrington Global Holdings tonight. They're a very private, very wealthy European syndicate. They've flown in specifically to bless my vision." Bianca leaned in, whispering in his ear. "Are you sure they're coming? It's 9 p.m. The keynote speech is in 10 minutes. "Relax, babe," Derek said, winking. "Power arrives late. It's a negotiation tactic. I know how these people think." Suddenly, the chatter in the room died down. It started near the massive double doors and rippled through the crowd like a wave of silence. The string quartet actually stopped playing mid-measure. Derek turned, annoyed. "What is going on? Did the waiters drop a tray?" But no one was looking at waiters. They were looking at the entrance. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was a woman. She was wearing a gown of deep, blood-red silk that clung to her frame like liquid fire. It was backless, daring and utterly sophisticated. Diamonds, real, heavy, vintage diamonds, glittered at her throat and ears. Her hair was a sharp, glossy bob that framed a face, striking in its cold beauty. She didn't just stand there. She owned the oxygen in the room. Derek squinted. The woman looked familiar, but in the way a dream feels familiar. The posture was different. The aura was different. "Who is that?" Bianca asked, her voice tight with jealousy. The woman began to descend the stairs. Flanking her were 4 men in dark suits, looking like the Secret Service. One of them was Reginald Forbes. As she reached the bottom step, the crowd parted for her, drawn by the magnetic pull of absolute power. She walked straight toward Derek. Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. As she got closer, the features resolved. The eyes, hazel, flecked with green. The curve of the lip. "Isabel," he breathed. It came out as a squeak. He laughed nervously, looking around. "Isabel! What are you doing here? Did you sneak in? Security!" He waved a hand. "This is a private event. You can't just rent a dress and crash." "Mr. Calloway," Reginald Forbes stepped forward, his voice booming. "I advise you to lower your voice." "I don't care who you are," Derek snapped, trying to regain control of the room. "This is my ex-wife. She's a cleaner. She's obviously having some sort of breakdown, and—" "I'm not here as your ex-wife, Derek," Isabel spoke. Her voice was low, smooth, and amplified perfectly by the acoustics of the room. It wasn't the shrill voice of the woman arguing about rent. It was the voice of a woman who signed checks. "Then why are you here?" Derek hissed. "To embarrass me?" "I'm here because you invited me," Isabel said, reaching into a small, diamond-encrusted clutch. She pulled out a heavy card, the invitation Derek had sent to the Harrington Global Headquarters in Zurich. She held it up. "You invited the chairman of Harrington Global Holdings to bless your vision. So, here I am." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Derek blinked. "What?" "No. Harrington it's a legacy fund. It's mine," Isabel said simply. "I am Isabel Harrington Archer, sole heir to the Harrington estate, and the majority shareholder of the capital group you've been begging for money for the last 3 months. Bianca dropped her champagne glass. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You?" Bianca gasped. "You have money?" Isabel turned her gaze to Bianca. It was a look of mild amusement, as if looking at a noisy pet. "I have capital, Bianca. There's a difference. Money is what you spend on dresses. Capital is what you use to buy the company that makes the dresses." Isabel turned back to Derek, who looked like he was having a stroke. His face was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Now," Isabel said, checking her diamond watch. "I believe you promised a keynote speech about the future of Calloway Prime. Please don't let me stop you. I'm very interested to hear how you plan to develop the waterfront project with the loan application I rejected this morning." A murmur of shock ran through the crowd. "Rejected?" someone whispered. "Calloway is unfunded," Derek stammered. It was a clerical error. We have other backers." "Do you?" Isabel asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because according to my due diligence, your entire liquidity is tied up in the Sterling Holloway Tower penthouse, a building which, incidentally, my firm acquired the debt note for last week." She took a step closer to Derek, leaning in so only he and Bianca could hear. "You told me I was destined for a small box, Derek. Do you remember?" Derek couldn't speak. He just nodded dumbly. "I decided to buy the box," she whispered, "and the building, and the block. Happy anniversary." Isabel turned and walked away, her red dress trailing behind her like a pool of blood. "Enjoy the party, everyone," she called out over her shoulder. The champagne is on me. Derek stood alone in the middle of the crowd, the centerpiece of his own humiliation. The morning after the gala, the phone at Callaway Prime didn't ring. It was dead silent. The investors who had promised funding had all read the business section of the Chicago Tribune. Headline: Cleaner to Queen. Isabel Archer revealed as billionaire tycoon behind Harrington Global. The photo showed Isabel in her red dress, looking regal. The inset photo showed Derek looking sweaty and terrified. Derek sat in his office, his head in his hands. Bianca was pacing the floor, smoking a cigarette, a habit she only indulged in when furious. "Fix this, Derek," she screamed. "My father is furious. He says you embarrassed the Sterling brand. He says you're toxic." "I didn't know," Derek yelled back. "How could I know? She was eating ramen noodles 6 months ago. She was scrubbing toilets. Well, now she's scrubbing us." Bianca threw an ashtray at the wall. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Callaway, Mr. Sterling is here to see you, and a Mr. Forbes." Derek's stomach dropped. "Send them in." Bianca's father, Arthur Sterling, stormed in. He was a large man with a red face and a temper to match. Behind him walked Reginald Forbes, calm and carrying a briefcase. "You idiot!" Sterling roared at Derek. "You told me you had the Harrington backing locked in. You told me your ex-wife was a nobody." "She was," Derek pleaded. "Gentlemen, please," Reginald said, sitting down without being asked. "We have business to discuss." "What business?" Derek spat. "Tell Isabel to go to hell." "Ms. Archer," Reginald corrected, "is currently in London overseeing the acquisition of a hotel chain. She has delegated the disposal of this matter to me." Reginald opened his briefcase and laid out a document. "This is a notice of default," Reginald said pleasantly. "Default?" Derek laughed nervously. "I'm not in default. I paid the lease on the office." "Not the office," Reginald said. "The penthouse, and the loans Callaway Prime took out to furnish it, and the loans Mr. Sterling took out to build the tower." Reginald turned to Arthur Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, your development company has a balloon payment of $40 million due next month. The contract states that if the primary tenant, Callaway Prime, fails to secure solvency, the bank has the right to accelerate the debt." Sterling went pale. "You're calling the loan?" "We are," Reginald said. "Harrington Global feels that the management of this building is unstable. We are exercising our right to foreclose." "You can't do that," Sterling shouted. "That tower is my legacy." "It's an asset," Reginald said cold. "And right now, it's a distressed asset." Reginald paused, looking from Sterling to Derek. "However, Ms. Archer is benevolent. She is willing to offer a restructuring deal to Mr. Sterling." "What kind of deal?" Sterling asked, desperate. "She will refinance your debt at a very favorable rate," Reginald said. "She will keep the Sterling name on the building. She will save you from bankruptcy." "What's the catch?" Bianca asked, eyes narrowing. "The catch," Reginald said, looking directly at Derek, "is that Callaway Prime must be evicted immediately, and Mr. Callaway must be removed from the board of any Sterling entity. Effectively, Mr. Sterling, you must choose your building or your daughter's boyfriend." The room went silent. Derek looked at Sterling. "Arthur, you can't be serious. We're family. Almost." Arthur Sterling didn't even look at Derek. He looked at Reginald. "Where do I sign?" "Daddy!" Bianca shrieked. "Shut up, Bianca!" Arthur snapped. "This is business. Derek, get out. You're fired. And get out of the penthouse by noon, or I'll have security throw your suits off the balcony." Derek stood up, trembling. Bianca? He looked at the woman he had left Isabel for. The woman who fit his future. Bianca looked at her father, then at the billionaire lawyer, then at Derek. She saw a man with no job, no apartment, and a very powerful enemy. "You heard him, Derek," Bianca said, her voice icy. "Get out and don't call me. I don't date homeless men." Reginald closed his briefcase with a satisfying click. "A pleasure doing business, Mr. Sterling. Derek, if you need a box for your things, I believe there's a dumpster out back." 2 weeks later, the rain in Chicago wasn't washing the city clean. It was just making the grime slicker. Isabel sat in the corner office of the newly christened Archer Tower. It was the same penthouse floor where Derek had once mocked her while holding a mop, but the space had been gutted and reborn. Gone were the ostentatious gold fixtures and velvet drapes that Bianca Sterling had favored. In their place was cool, minimalist slate, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a silence that cost a fortune to engineer. Isabel was reviewing the blueprints for the Callaway Reskilling Center, a vocational school she was quietly funding in the South Side, though she had decided to keep the name ironically anonymous. She looked up as the intercom on her mahogany desk buzzed, slicing through the quiet. "Ms. Archer." Her executive assistant's voice was tight, laced with a professional anxiety. "He's still here. Security has asked him to leave 3 times. He's making a scene in the lobby. He's shouting about spousal rights and scaring the clients." Isabel sighed, taking off her reading glasses. She had known this moment would come. Men like Derek Callaway didn't just fade away, they festered. They stewed in their own inadequacy until it boiled over into a desperate, messy rage. "Let him up," Isabel said, her voice calm. "But tell the security team to hold the elevator at this floor. I want 2 guards outside my door, invisible but ready." "Are you sure, Miss Archer?" "I'm sure. It's time to close the book." 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors to her office swung open. Derek Callaway walked in, or rather, he stumbled in. The transformation was shocking, even to Isabel. It had only been 2 weeks since the gala, but Derek looked like he had aged a decade. The custom Armani suit, the one he had refused to sell when they were starving, was wrinkled and stained, hanging loosely on a frame that had lost its gym-honed definition. His face was grey, covered in a patch of 3-day stubble that wasn't a fashion statement, but a sign of surrender. His eyes, usually bright with unearned confidence, were bloodshot and darting around the room like a trapped animal. He stopped in the center of the vast office, his shoes squeaking on the polished concrete floor. He looked at the view of Lake Michigan. He looked at the abstract art on the walls. Finally, he looked at Isabel. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer him a seat. She simply watched him, her hands clasped on top of the blueprints. "Isabel," he croaked. His voice cracked, a dry, raspy sound. "Derek," she replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You have 5 minutes. My billing rate is currently $5,000 an hour, but I'll write this off as a charitable donation." Derek flinched at the word charity. He straightened his spine, trying to summon the ghost of his old arrogance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, slamming it onto her pristine desk. "I'm not here for charity," he spat, though his hands were shaking. "I'm here for what's mine. I spoke to a lawyer, a guy I met at a bar on State Street. He's a shark, Isabel, and he told me everything." Isabel raised an eyebrow, glancing at the paper. It was a napkin with scribbled legal jargon on it. "And what did this shark tell you, Derek?" "He said I have a case for fraud." Derek's voice rose to a shout, echoing off the glass walls. "You inherited this money while we were married. You had to have known. You hid assets during the divorce settlement. That's a felony, Isabel. It's concealment of marital property." He began to pace, his energy manic. $1.3 billion. And you let me walk away with nothing. You let me take the debt? The courts won't like that. I'm going to sue you for half. No, more than half. Emotional distress, punitive damages. By the time I'm done, you'll be back in that boarding house. Isabel waited for him to finish. She watched him panting, his chest heaving with false indignation. She felt a strange sensation, not fear, not anger, but pity. He was so small. "Are you done?" she asked softly. "I'm just getting started." "Sit down, Derek," she commanded. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order given with the weight of a CEO. Caught off guard, Derek slumped into the leather guest chair. Isabel stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge, looking down at him. "You really didn't read the papers, did you? You were so eager to run to Bianca and her penthouse that you just signed whatever Reginald put in front of you." "I signed a standard divorce decree," Derek argued. "You signed a timeline," Isabel corrected. "Let me explain something to you about Great-Aunt Cordelia. She was a woman who detested stupidity almost as much as she detested greed. She knew you, Derek. She had files on you going back 5 years. She knew about the credit cards. She knew about the emotional abuse. And she knew that if I inherited the money while we were married, you would drain me dry." Isabel leaned in closer, her perfume, expensive, subtle, sandalwood and rose, wafting over him. "The will was held in a blind trust with a trigger clause," she explained, enunciating every word. "The assets were legally frozen, non-existent to me, until the exact moment I was no longer Mrs. Derek Calloway. The timestamp on our divorce decree was 9:02 a.m. that Tuesday. The timestamp on the trust activation was 9:01 a.m. Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "For that 1 minute," Isabel whispered, "I was a single, unemployed woman with $11 in her bank account. That is the woman you divorced. You didn't divorce a billionaire, Derek. You created one. Legally, you have claim to absolutely nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Derek stared at her, the realization crashing down on him like a physical blow. The legal loophole he had clung to was a fantasy. There was no lawsuit. There was no payout. There was just him and his mistakes. His face crumbled. The anger drained away, leaving only naked terror. He looked at his hands, hands that used to sign leases on luxury cars, now shaking and empty. I didn't know," he whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes, tracking through the grime on his cheeks. "Isabel, I'm ruined. Sterling is suing me for the lease break on the penthouse. I owe the credit card companies $40,000. They took my car this morning. I have nowhere to go." He looked up at her, and his eyes changed. The desperation shifted into something manipulative. He slid out of the chair and fell to his knees. "Isabel, please," he begged, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away sharply. "Don't touch me." "We were good once," he cried, ignoring her recoil. Remember our honeymoon in Wisconsin? Remember when we adopted Buster? We were a team, Izzy. You loved me. I know you did. You sold your mother's ring for me." "Yes," Isabel said, her voice like ice. "I sold my mother's ring to pay for your mistakes, and you thanked me by calling me dead weight on our anniversary." "I was stressed. I wasn't myself," Derek sobbed, clutching at the hem of her silk trousers. "I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. Bianca, she was nothing. She was just a distraction. You're the one. You've always been the one. Look at you. You're a queen now. You need a king. Let me come back. I'll sign a prenup. I won't ask for a dime. Just let me be your husband again. Let me take care of you." Isabel looked down at the man kneeling on her Persian rug. She searched her heart for any flicker of the old love. She looked for the charm, the warmth, the partnership they had promised each other. She found nothing. It wasn't that she hated him. It was worse. She felt absolutely nothing. He was a stranger, a bad investment she had written off years ago. "You don't want me, Derek," she said, her voice flat. "You don't miss me. You miss the safety. You're drowning, and you think I'm a life raft." "Yes," he admitted, sobbing openly now. "I am drowning. Please, Izzy, save me. You have billions. You wouldn't even miss it. Just let me stay in one of your apartments. Give me a job. Anything." Isabel walked back to her desk and sat down. She felt lighter than she had in years. The final shackle was broken. "I do have a job opening," she said thoughtfully. Derek's head snapped up, hope flaring in his eyes. "Yes. I can run sales. I can manage the properties. I know the market, Isabel." "The job isn't in sales," Isabel said, picking up her pen and returning to her blueprints. "I own a diner on 5th Street, the Bluebird. I used to work a double shift there while you sat on the couch, vision boarding. The manager tells me they need a dishwasher. The pay is minimum wage, but you get a free meal per shift." Derek stared at her, his jaw unhinged. A dishwasher?" "Me." "It's honest work, Derek," she said, without looking up. "It builds character. Something you're sorely lacking." "You bitch!" Derek screamed, scrambling to his feet, his face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. "You think you're better than me? You're nothing. You're just a lucky little—" Isabel pressed the button on her desk. The double doors flew open instantly. 2 security guards, each the size of a linebacker, stepped in. They didn't need instructions. They had been listening. "Get off me!" Derek shrieked as they grabbed him by the arms. They lifted him effortlessly, his feet dragging on the floor. "You owe me!" Derek howled, spittle flying from his lips as they dragged him backward. "I made you! You're nothing without me, Isabel! Isabel!" Isabel didn't look up. She didn't flinch. She simply waited until his voice faded down the hallway and the elevator dinged shut. Only then did she exhale. She swiveled her chair around to face the window, looking out at the sprawling city of Chicago. The rain was still falling, but up here, above the clouds, the sun was just starting to break through. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Reginald?" "Yes, Miss Archer," the lawyer's crisp voice answered. "He came. I assumed he would. How did it go?" "He's gone," Isabel said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "And Reginald?" "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon. I'm going to go look at that property on the Gold Coast. I think I'm ready to build something new." "Very good, Miss Archer." "Very good indeed." Isabel hung up. She was no longer a wife. She was no longer a victim. She was the architect of her own life, and for the first time, the foundation was rock solid. 5 years is a long time in a city like Chicago. It is enough time for skylines to change, for fortunes to be made, and for men to be forgotten. The Archer Tower now dominated the lakefront, a glittering needle of glass and steel that housed the headquarters of Isabel's empire. She had become a fixture of the city, a philanthropist, a titan of industry, and a symbol of resilience. She was photographed at galas wearing vintage Chanel, usually on the arm of her new husband, Thomas. Thomas was a quiet, rugged landscape architect who didn't care about the billions. He loved Isabel because she laughed at his terrible jokes and liked to eat tacos on the hood of his truck. She was happy. She was safe. She was complete. Derek Calloway, on the other hand, was none of those things. He was currently the night manager at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar located 3 blocks off the tourist strip near Navy Pier. It was the kind of place that smelled permanently of stale beer, damp wool, and regret. The floors were sticky, the neon sign flickered with a headache-inducing buzz, and the patrons were mostly regulars who drank to forget that they had nowhere else to go. Derek had aged in a way that wasn't graceful, The sharp jawline that had once charmed wealthy widows in car dealerships was now softened by puffiness and cheap alcohol. His hair, once his pride and joy, was thinning aggressively at the temples. He wore a polyester shirt with a manager name tag that was crooked. It was a Tuesday night in November. The wind was howling off the lake, rattling the single-pane windows of the bar. It was the same kind of biting cold that had swirled around him the night he left Isabel in that freezing apartment 5 years ago. Derek stood behind the bar, wiping down a spot that would never be clean. The TV in the corner was muted, playing the local news. Suddenly, a picture flashed on the screen. It was Isabel, cutting a ribbon at a new children's hospital wing. She looked radiant. Derek stared at the screen, his hand freezing on the rag. A bitter, acidic bile rose in his throat. "Turn that garbage off," he barked at the bartender, a kid named Leo. "But boss, that's the Archer lady," Leo said, looking at the screen. "She just donated 50 mil. She's a saint." "She's a witch," Derek muttered, grabbing the remote and killing the feed. "And get back to work." The door to the bar creaked open, letting in a gust of icy wind and rain. "We're closing in 10, Derek shouted without looking up. "Last call was 5 minutes ago." "I believe," a voice said, a voice smooth as aged cognac and cold as a tombstone, "that your sign says open until 2 a.m. Derek froze. He knew that voice. It was the voice that had haunted his nightmares for half a decade. He looked up. Standing in the entryway, shaking rain off a black umbrella, was Reginald Forbes. The lawyer looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago. He was wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than the entire inventory of the bar. He held a cane with a silver handle, though he didn't seem to need it for walking. He looked out of place, like a diamond in a dumpster. The few drunks at the end of the bar went quiet, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. Reginald walked slowly to the center of the bar. He placed his cane on the counter with a deliberate click. He didn't look at the sticky floor. He looked directly at Derek. "Hello, Mr. Calloway." Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a sudden urge to run out the back door, but his legs felt like lead. "What are you doing here?" Derek rasped. "Here to sue me again. I don't have anything left. You took the car. You took the condo. I live in a studio above a laundromat. You won. Leave me alone." "I am not here to litigate," Reginald said calmly, taking a seat on a torn vinyl stool. "I am here to tidy up. Whiskey. Neat. And not the swill from the rail. Top shelf." Derek poured the drink with trembling hands. He slid the glass across the bar. Reginald took a sip, grimaced slightly, but said nothing. "Why are you really here?" Derek demanded, leaning over the bar. "Did she send you? Is she outside in the limo, laughing?" "Isabel doesn't think about you, Derek," Reginald said, setting the glass down. "She doesn't hate you. She doesn't pity you. To her, you are simply a chapter in a book she finished reading a long time ago. She is in Paris this week, I believe. Honeymooning." The words hit Derek like physical blows. Indifference was worse than hatred. Hatred meant you still mattered. "Then why come?" Derek asked, his voice breaking. "Just to torture me?" "I am retiring," Reginald stated. "Next week, I step down as senior partner at Forbes, Keaton and Associates. As part of my departure, I am archiving the Harrington estate files. I came across the original last will and testament of Cordelia Vanderbilt Harrington." "The dead aunt," Derek sneered. "The one who rigged the game." "The one who understood human nature," Reginald corrected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was a photocopy, heavy and official. "You never read the full will, did you, Derek? You were so focused on the inheritance clause, the one that gave Isabel the billions, that you stopped reading." It didn't matter, Derek muttered. I got nothing. That is where you are wrong, Reginald said softly. He smoothed the paper out on the wet bar top. Cordelia was a cynical woman, but she was fair. She worried that perhaps her judgment of you was too harsh. She worried that maybe you were a good man who simply fell out of love. It happens. Marriages end. She didn't want to punish a man for honesty. Reginald tapped a paragraph near the bottom of the page. Read Clause 12b, the consolation of character clause. Derek squinted at the dense legal text. Clause 12b. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, should the husband, Mr. Derek Calloway, demonstrate undue hardship, kindness, or grace during the separation proceedings. Derek stopped reading. He looked up at Reginald. What does this mean? Keep reading, Reginald commanded. Specifically, should he leave the marriage without malice, cruelty, or demands for financial ruin of my niece, the estate shall grant him a one-time fresh start payment of $5,000, $5 million USD, to ensure he is not left destitute as a final act of charity towards the man my niece once loved. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the bar faded away. The buzzing of the neon sign stopped. All Derek could hear was the rushing of blood in his ears. $5 million, he whispered. $5 million, Reginald confirmed. Tax-free. It was sitting in an escrow account the day you met me in the lobby, the day you were served the papers. Derek gripped the edge of the bar so hard his knuckles turned white. You had it? I had the check in my briefcase, Reginald said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I was instructed by the will to observe your behavior. It was a test, Derek. Not a test of your bank account, but a test of your soul. Reginald leaned in, his eyes hard as flint. If you had looked at Isabel that day, when she was holding that mop, soaking wet, and said, I'm sorry, Isabel, I can't stay, but I hope you'll be okay. If you had shown 1 ounce of dignity, if you hadn't thrown that $20 bill on the floor like she was a beggar. Reginald paused, letting the memory hang in the air between them. If you had been a decent human being for 10 seconds, I would have handed you a check for $5 million. You could have started your own firm. You could have kept your dignity. You could have walked away a wealthy man. Derek felt like he was going to vomit. The memory of that night in the lobby rushed back to him. The feeling of power he had felt when he mocked her. The laughter he shared with Bianca. He had traded $5 million for a cheap laugh and a moment of cruelty. I didn't know, Derek stammered, tears spilling onto his cheeks. Reginald, please. I was stupid. I was young. Can't you still release it? The clause? I'm destitute. Look at me. Reginald stood up slowly, buttoning his coat. The clause had an expiration, Derek. It expired the moment you filed that frivolous threat to sue her for fraud. It expired the moment you tried to destroy her happiness because you couldn't have your own. Reginald picked up the photocopy of the will. He tore it in half, then in quarters. He dropped the pieces onto the sticky bar top. The money is gone, Derek. It was donated to the Humane Society in Buster's name. Isabel thought that was fitting. Reginald adjusted his silk scarf. He looked at Derek one last time, not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a coroner looking at a corpse. You spent your whole life chasing value, Mr. Calloway. You wanted the expensive suit, the expensive car, the expensive wife. But you never understood worth. You thought Isabel was worthless because she was poor. And you thought you were valuable because you were loud. Reginald reached into his wallet. He pulled out a crisp, new $100 bill. He placed it gently on the counter, right next to the torn will. "For the whiskey," Reginald said. "Keep the change. Consider it your severance package from the life you could have had." Reginald turned and walked toward the door, his cane clicking rhythmically on the floor. "Wait!" Derek screamed, stumbling out from behind the bar. "You can't leave me like this. It's not fair. It's a trick." Reginald didn't stop. He pushed open the door, opened his umbrella, and stepped out into the rainy Chicago night. Derek ran to the window. He pressed his face against the cold glass. He saw Reginald get into the back of a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, idling at the curb. As the car pulled away, the rear window rolled down just an inch. Derek caught a glimpse of a woman in the back seat. Not Isabel, but a shadow of the life he had thrown away. The taillights of the Rolls-Royce faded into the red blur of traffic, heading toward the Gold Coast, toward warmth, toward the future. Derek turned back to the empty bar. He looked at the torn paper. He looked at the $100. He sank to his knees on the dirty floor, surrounded by the smell of stale beer and failure. He realized then that the universe hadn't conspired against him. Isabel hadn't ruined him. Great Aunt Cordelia hadn't cursed him. He had held the keys to the kingdom in his hand, and he had thrown them away because he wanted to hear the sound of them hitting the floor. Derek Calloway closed his eyes and wept, while outside the rain continued to wash the city clean, indifferent to the man who had drowned himself on dry land. They say living well is the best revenge, but in Derek's case, the revenge was written in the fine print he never bothered to read. He spent his life believing that money made the man, never realizing that it was his character that determined his price. He traded a $5 million exit for a $20 insult, proving that while you can inherit a fortune, you cannot inherit class. Isabel didn't just win because she got the billions, she won because she kept her soul. Derek didn't lose because he was poor, he lost because he was cheap. This story is a reminder to everyone watching. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because you never know who owns the building or who wrote the will. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to know your thoughts. Did Great Aunt Cordelia go too far with her test, or did Derek get exactly what he deserved? Tell me in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.